Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Mindy McAllister, and I am the Education and Outreach Specialist at the Palouse Conservation District. Tonight, I am joined by my colleagues Liz, who will be monitoring the chat and coordinating behind the scenes this evening, Chuck, one of our conservation planners and manager of our wildfire resiliency efforts in the district. You'll hear from him a bit later on about available funding in Whitman County, as well as our presenter, Robert Boles, who we will be hearing from soon. We're very excited to bring you this presentation tonight, and we're looking forward to spending the next hour with you. This talk is being recorded and will be posted on our channels early next week, so you can watch it again if you enjoy it. Before we get started, some of you have already done this, but please go ahead and let us know in the chat where you're joining us from tonight. Okay, for those who may not be familiar with us, the Palouse Conservation District is a local government agency based in Pullman, Washington. We engage with landowners on a voluntary basis to keep our air, water, soil, and habitats healthy. We are one of 4 conservation districts located in Whitman County. We have 21 staff, 1 AmeriCorps member, 1 Veterans Conservation Corps member, 1 undergraduate intern, and we are led by a 5-member volunteer board. Our mission is to foster the voluntary conservation of natural resources by providing the tools, education, technical expertise, and financial assistance to support our local community. For the remainder of the presentation, I'd like to ask you to please keep your microphone muted. I do encourage you to keep your camera on if you're comfortable doing so. However, if you run into any bandwidth issues, then I would recommend turning your camera off. Typically, that helps a little bit. The camera and microphone controls can be found on the bottom left of your screen if you're unfamiliar with Zoom. If you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we'll go through them with our presenter at the end. Just a reminder that this talk is being recorded, and we will get this posted to our website early next week. Before we begin, I want to tell you about a few upcoming events, including our next Conservation Talk series, which will be here pretty quickly on Thursday, December 5th. We'll be joined by Melissa McElvey, a habitat biologist for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, for a presentation on living with nature's engineers. Beavers create essential habitat for native fish species, increase wildfire resistance, and help mitigate drought. But living with them on your property can have its own set of challenges. Learn about the key role they play in our ecosystem, how we mimic their work in habitat restoration, and ways to coexist with them through the use of pond levelers and beaver deceivers. To get registered for that talk, feel free to visit the link getting dropped into the chat now. We are also excited to share information on our spring tree sale. If you're interested in planting native trees and shrubs on your property next spring, be sure to check out our tree sale live on our website now. We have dozens of species available for pre-order, including many species that help improve landscape resiliency and habitat on your property. Be sure to place your order soon because some species do sell out, and the link in our online store is getting put in the chat as well. We also have a team of resource conservation folks that can help answer questions about those species, so feel free to reach out to the contact information on that page as well. Finally, I am excited to introduce our presenter for this evening. Robert Boles began his robust career in wildland firefighting in 2010 as a forestry technician with the Virginia Department of Forestry. He's worked from coast to coast for a number of agencies, including the United States Forest Service and the Washington Department of Natural Resources, where he spent time as a crew supervisor, assistant fire management officer, and district fire management officer. Currently, he serves as the Washington DNR Community Resilience Coordinator for our region, overseeing programs like Firewise USA sites and community wildfire protection plans across Spokane, Stevens, Pend Oreille, Lincoln, and Whitman counties. In this role, Robert conducts assessments, develops plans for Firewise communities, and delivers presentations on defensible space to public and agency audiences. He also collaborates with landowners to promote best practices for property and community survivability. During fire season, Robert can be found contributing to complex incident management teams as a division supervisor and assisting the local DNR district by taking on various leadership roles, including incident commander and duty officer. At this time, I will go ahead and hand it off to Robert to begin his presentation.
All right. Thanks, Mindy. Appreciate it. All right, let's hope I can get this right the first time around this time. Right. So we should be seeing the slideshow. I just saw a thumbs up from Mindy, so it worked for once. Again, thank you. I appreciate you guys inviting me to come. As Mindy said, started my career in 2010 in the state of Virginia. That's where I was born and raised, with as well as my wife. We moved up here in 2014 after serving with the U.S. Forest Service. Uh, Coincidentally, I actually applied to the Washington State as a joke. I didn't think they would actually hire me. 10 years later, a mortgage and a kid, we're still here. So, welcome to Washington, right? Since then, a lot of primary fire operations positions throughout my career up until last August, August of 23, and joined the Community Resilience Program, working with Firewise USA, Wildfire Ready Neighbors, home assessments, doing presentations like this, and then actually working with county level and county resources on trying to establish and collaborate and just come up with what we can do to better create more resilient communities throughout our counties, throughout Northeast Washington. So that's kind of where we go. The whole goal of this is when bad things happen, you recover and your return to normalcy is going to be quicker because of the actions you take. The things we'll talk about can be used whether you live in downtown Pullman, downtown Spokane, or you live on a 200-acre tract of land, completely forested or completely covered in sage, or even all agriculture. Um, it all applies. We're going to be focusing at the home itself and within the immediate surroundings of the home. That is the most critical part of what you can do. Everything away from the home is just essentially the reduction of the fire's energy at that point. So here's an example. We all, Spokane, Whitman, Lincoln, everybody lives in the urban interface in some extent. And again, the actions that you take can change the outcome of when bad things happen. This is the Wellesley Fire of 2016. And all said and done, we did lose structures on that fire. This particular residence, the only thing that happened was buckled vinyl siding. Everything else survived, including the hot tub, as you can see in the left picture. The important things, right? So, so just some quick general fire statistics. As you can see, for Northeast region. Here's all sorts of causes. Here's the numbers and acreage. But the interesting thing out of the whole thing is debris burning is the number one cause of fire. So it's human. So if we were in a classroom all sitting there together, I'd ask you all to raise your hands and say, who burns debris at their house? And then guilt trip you into letting you know you're the number one fire starter in Northeast region. So um, that's the number one cause, but typically the most acreage comes actually out of lightning. Typically when lightning strikes happen, they're in more remote areas. A great example is the Boulder Mountain Fire in 22 up in Pend Oreille County. It's a very large fire and it took resources almost 24 hours to actually make access to the fire itself to even begin engaging on it. Because of its remoteness. There were some roads, but locked gates, trees had fallen over it. They had to buck them out, and it took a really long time to figure out how to even get to it. So typically these fires are going to be bigger because of their remoteness, but the human caused fires are typically going to be the number one reasons for fires to start. Just quickly, we'll touch on the Grand Oregon fire, but more so as an example. August 18th, 2023. If you are a flame of fire, this is a great day for you. Relative humidities were down. The lowest recording was 6%. I believe the average was like 8% that day all across. Those readings came from Spokane International. It actually was not a very hot day at all at 86 to 90 degrees. But preceding to that day, we had a week or more of upper 90s, 100-degree temperatures. So that's just pulling moisture out of all of the fuels. It was very windy that day, 30 miles an hour plus. And those winds were predicted very early on, which was good, which gave resources some kind of an advantage. But with that kind of wind speeds, not so much. But they knew the winds were going to be westerly, southwesterly, and then switching to the north sometime that evening, which means the fire is going to do an entire 90-degree turn on them. So that allowed them to at least plan for that. The Gray Fire started at 1227, 10,000 acres, 240 homes were destroyed, 86 outbuildings. The point I want to make with both the Gray, and you can read the stats on the Oregon fires, within 2 hours of the start of Gray Fire, the entirety of Medical Lake was under evacuation, mandatory evacs. So that's how fast, as these fires burn, how fast evacuations can come into play. Um, there's really not going to be a lot of, hey, get ready. You may have to evacuate and then evacuate. Many times
This
it is.
is protecting your home and property from wildfire.
So I just want to throw that out there. Evacuation and planning for that is definitely critical. No matter where you live and what you do, those can come. I was talking with the emergency manager of Spokane a couple months back, and coincidentally, one of her first days as the emergency manager in Spokane was the day I requested evacuations on the Laurel Road fire, standing in the middle of Highway 2 with a police officer, and we were at the fire 30 minutes after it started, and we were the only two at it. That's how fast it can happen. So this picture is an illustration of obviously fire burning, but what actually causes structures to burn down? And again, if we were in person, I'd ask, what do you think? And because of perception, because of the images we see in the news, we see in the newspapers, the photographs, the live footage, many times this is the perception of how homes burn down. It's that direct flame front impinging and coming through, when in reality it's the embers that come out, the leaves, the sticks, the bark that comes. During the Oregon and Gray Road fires, I was actually on the California state line, and 2 days after our fire started here, when I was down there, 2 days after that, I had lost 7 structures due to embers, and they were the structures were 3/4 of a mile ahead of the main direct front. These embers can travel up to a mile, and the more energy that fire has, the more convective heat, the more it's going to pull those embers up and send them aloft. My wife was telling me when I got home that because of the Gray Road fire, we had ash fall out all over our house, and we were multiple miles away, but in the direct path of it. But that's how far that stuff can travel. Oops. There we go. We're gonna test this, and hopefully this works as a short video talking about radiant heat, perception, and structure ignition.
When I show this picture to people, they're absolutely amazed that this can occur. First of all, we have the sense that wildfire, high intensity wildfire, like depicted in this particular picture, absolutely engulfs and explodes houses into flames. And so when I show this, and by the way, let me just say that this high intensity fire at its closest point is about 45 feet from this house. And let me also say that the photographer in this picture was feeling a considerable exposure to the flame. They were beginning to feel the pain that is accompanied by the exposure that produces injury. But that says nothing about what's going on with this house. So let's take a look and see what the house looks like after the fire. So the crown fire has spread through and the house is still here. And the house is still there, not because fire suppression, fire protection actions were taken to keep that house from burning down. This house actually did not ignite from that fire. So where's the disconnect in all of this? Well, the disconnect is between what we feel as a person and what it takes to ignite this structure from flames. What we feel is pain and injury from exposures to heat that is considerably less than what it takes to actually even char wood. Let me give you an example. The exposure that will produce a 2nd-degree burn on my exposed skin in 5 seconds takes over 27 minutes to ignite the wood. What that means is that I can get very burned from a fire and the house isn't even beginning to char. So what does that mean in terms of our perspective? Well, what that means is that we start paying attention to these big flames, which then produces our perception that, my goodness, how in the world can this house still be here with all that flame in the picture? And the reason is because the requirements for combustion that are produced by a flame like that are so much higher than what it takes to cause us injury that our perspective is personal. Our perspective is from our pain and injury, not from the requirements for combustion. So as it turns out, we are many, many times, more than 100 times more sensitive to pain and injury than what it takes to actually ignite this house. And that means we start paying a lot of attention to flames like this and not to things like firebrands. Firebrands that are extremely effective in igniting the structure from their accumulation and then slowly producing glowing combustion on the house that then produces flaming combustion if it sustains and eventually destroys the house, is out of our perspective. Our perspective is on what affects us, the big flames, the big heat that we feel that produces the pain that impresses us is not necessarily related to what it takes to ignite the structure.
Good. Oh. There we go. So, like Jack Cohn was saying, if everything's done properly, a fire will move around. Structures take a really long time to ignite. It's the embers we need to worry about. Obviously, if you have vinyl siding, things like that, it can melt, but ultimately the fire can go around. It's the small embers that collect in the little crooks and crannies on the decorations or the patio furniture or plants around the homes, things like that. And so when we're looking at homes, we work with property owners, and we can wrap whatever the property goals are around making it still be fire resilient. So if your property goals, if it's fire, maybe the answer is we're going to make it a parking lot. Wildlife, we can incorporate that. Forest health, we can incorporate that. We can go, even if let's say you're a beekeeper, again, we can utilize that and still create fire resiliency around the structures. When you're looking at your property, you want to look at where are your heavy fuels, and this is kind of an exercise on where to even start with your property. Where's your heaviest fuels? It's a flat map, so it's hard to see it, but we'll pretend on the south end that's a really steep slope, which influences fire behavior to move uphill. What are your summertime afternoon winds? Here at my house, every day at 2 o'clock during the summer, come southwest winds. You can almost set your watch to it. Again, southwest winds are where that's your embers are going to be coming out of the southwest and hitting your southwest side of your structure. And so where you start to overlap these zones, that's kind of how you can start prioritizing your property. So through this, we'll be talking about home ignition zones, zones 1 and 2 specifically in this conversation. Zone 1 being that immediate zone, 0 to 5 feet. That's where you need to be ember aware. In zone 2, you're lean, clean, and green. It's your yard and garden area and with maintenance. Zone 3, we won't be really talking about that, but that is the unimproved portion. That's 30 feet, 50 feet, all the way out to the full extent. Typically in this area, it's unimproved. It's really not maintained. And the ways to help mitigate fire and create resiliency out there is essentially the reduction of energy in the fire. So basic landscape principles. Again, zone 1 at 0 to 5 feet. You want 0 to minimal fuels in there. Being again ember aware, looking for more fire resistant plants, plants that have high fuel moisture. Patchy, you want to break up the continuity of it, space them out, not only between each other, but even away from the house. And mixtures of hardscapes such as gravel, rock, slate, with the vegetation, and try to limit, tender, the small, the pine needles, the leaves, the very small twigs. Zone 2, again, focusing on all the above, but you can start reintroducing a little bit more of that vegetation back in. So again, being ember aware from your structure to 5 feet. No such thing as a plant that will not burn. Some plants are just more resistant to fire than others. It's really interesting, just a fun little fact. Here in the Northwest, we actually see rhododendron, or mountain laurel, as we call it where I'm from, in people's yards. And here in the Northwest, it's fine because it's not continuous. So if you go back to Virginia, where I'm originally from, you go up in the mountains, rhododendrons everywhere. It's all in the understory, and it is very thick. It's continuous, and because of all the dead leaves that fall off during the fall and the winter, it builds up underneath. So as fire comes through in the fall and the spring, it generates that heat, and that rhododendron, when it's green, if you feel the leaves, it feels kind of waxy and thick. As the heat is generated and builds up underneath the plant itself, that wax kind of starts to come off and then becomes highly combustible. Again, it's a continuous fuel, and again, it's more resistant to fire when it's individual plants here and there, like you find in decorative yards here in the Northwest. But when it becomes a continuous sea of it in understory of timber, completely different result. So again, fuel moisture, what we're looking for, what I like to use an example is like hostas. Hostas are a great plant. Some of these flowers that you see in here, they remain green, very colorful. They have a lot of essentially water in them, high fuel moisture. Shape and size, looking at light versus heavy fuels. The fuel loading, the biomass, the horizontal continuity, and the vertical arrangement. So when we're looking at these plants, these are really pretty, and obviously there's probably a sprinkler system in there to help keep them, because that'd be some serious watering effort to tackle to keep them that pretty. So that's good. The fuel moisture is higher in these, and it's going to be more resistant, but you still want to look at um, how much dead material is down underneath there. How continuous is that dead material? Again, ideally you spread those apart horizontally, and even if you can see under the window, I don't think you can, no, can't see that. Under the window on the right side, there's that bush that's right directly against the siding, right against the house. That's stuff we want to pull away from the house. So if it does catch fire, it can't come up underneath the siding. or through the windows, anything like that. And we'll be continuing to talk about some of these things. So characteristics of plants that burn hot: accumulation of dead vegetation, dense branching patterns, oily, waxy leaves, lots of biomass, lots of leaves, lots of branches, fast growing plants. These guys are arborvitae. You can tell a neighborhood was built in the 70s or early 80s, and sometimes in the very early 90s, but the 70s, 80s era, these bad boys are everywhere. And they burn super hot. Because of everything that's underneath, all of the dead material goes underneath. It's even intermixed inside the bushes. Once those things go, there's no putting them out. As you can see in the picture there, you probably have 20 to 30 feet separation between the house and the arborvitae, the juniper cedar species, and it still melted that house. That's how much heat those things will put off. So it's always recommended that if you have those, you want to remove them, replace them with something else. Characteristics of fire resistant: little accumulation of dead, open and loose branching. I'm not going to read through all of it. Slow growing. Flowers, garden plants. Again, I like to use the hostas. I think they look great. They're great for decorations. This is just how we view plants as firefighters: the ignitability, how easy will they ignite, how tall will the flames, how long will it burn. Zone 1 plants. So again, non to minimal is the preference, but again, everything's with a grain of salt. We can accommodate any type of variations. Low biomass, patchy planting, so there's spacing between the plants themselves and then spacing away from the homes. Looking at the horizontal vertical continuities, trying to eliminate that. No trees, but really when it comes to trees, you don't want to have them next to your house within 5 feet of your house anyways, just because of roots. That's your foundation, so hopefully you don't have that. So the landscaping, again, just some ideas. The picture on the left, it's sand with a little bit of grass. It's non-combustible. The one in the middle, that's green grass. It's maintained. That is fine. Embers and green grass like that, they just die out. Same with the sand. The picture on the right, they've used rock through there, and then again broken up that horizontal and the vertical continuity of the plantings. So it still looks really pretty, but if one plant or one brush catches on fire, it can't spread to the next or the adjacent. Within zone 1, the best idea, if possible, even if you just don't put mulch down for 1 year, save the money, and then put rock down the second year, the rock's gonna be your best option. It's non-flammable. I was actually talking to a good friend of mine who works in fuels, and they replaced theirs with I think he said crushed slate. And I've talked to another landowner that used river rock, and they both really like it because when they go mow their yard every day or every week in the summer, they're doing leaves in the fall, they just take the leaf blower out and blow all the dead material out, and it's harder to accumulate. If you're going to use mulch, you want to use the larger pieces. Again, it's flammable, but because it's bigger, it's going to take a little bit more to ignite. But still, rock is the best. If you're going to use mulch, try to steer clear of the really fine mulch in there. It's a lot more receptive to those embers. Again, being ember aware, really, it's the little things. My boss calls these Mother's Day plants because I guess a lot of mothers get them for Mother's Day. I think my wife would kill me. But they're great. They're really pretty. They're really green when you get them until you stop watering them, and they look like the picture on the right. Now you have a very receptive fuel bed. Even when they're still alive and green, that coconut husk and moss that's actually encompassing them are highly flammable. So it's something to be aware of. If it dies, make sure to get rid of it. Um, just things that are out on your porches, your patios, next to your garages, trash day, recycling day, if that just happens to be on the same day of a fire, that's another receptive fuel bed. Patio furniture. Nowadays, obviously, a lot of the patio furniture is made with fire resistant materials that help retard the spread and manipulation of fire, but just as guilty as most people, my patio furniture sits out all summer long. Some of it, don't judge me, is probably still sitting on the patio, and that wears and breaks down through the UV rays and things like that. So over time, it's going to lose that ability um, to retard that fire spread. Even the little simple decorations on the patios. And one thing we like to talk about is, during the winter, we have winter storm warnings. Um, hey, there's going to be a blizzard on Tuesday. What do a lot of people do? They get their snow blowers ready, they get their shovels ready, they prep for it. What do we do when we have red flag days? Do we prep for it? Do we pull the patio furniture into the garage? Do we, the really pretty broom, decorative broom, do we pull that inside into the garage or move it somewhere where it can't be a receptive bed for embers? It's these little things that when we hear red flags that maybe we need to treat it like a snow blizzard or ice storm coming in, do a little bit of prep, make sure we have some of these receptive beds out of there. Don't add fuel to the fire, so to speak. No pun intended. Okay. Interesting fact, heat from wildfire may be enough to ignite furnishing inside your house through the windows, even if the glass remains intact. That is true. Ideally, modern day construction, most homes have double pane anyway, especially in the Northwest. And so that will help diffuse that heat. But interesting enough, I think the fire was actually the same year I first came to Washington, 2014. My current supervisor and another gentleman investigated a fire, and then we're looking at a house that ignited. And the interesting thing is when they were looking at the house that ignited, it ignited from the inside and came out. And what had happened is single pane windows with really nice kind of lacy style curtains right up against. As the fire came through, big enough heat, a lot of heat, radiant heat through the window, caught those drapes on fire, and that's how they actually lost the structure. Roofs and gutters. One thing I like to recommend to people is by July 1st, have your roofs and gutters cleaned of pine needles, any of that leafy debris. That is a receptive fuel bed. And I'm gonna mess this word up because I always do. Hopefully I get it right tonight. The problem with gutters, where the weak point is in the gutters, is as the fuel collects down inside that gutter, when it comes up, the gutter comes up towards the roof. It's the fascia. Hopefully I'm saying that right. That is where the fire will actually, as it ignites what's in the gutter, the fire will actually come through the fascia into the roof. That's how it gets in. So gutter guards are nice. There are a couple, and I cannot off the top of my head, but there's one or two specific types that are really help just shed pine needles off versus getting clogged in there. But gutter guards can help to an extent. You still want to make sure it's all cleaned off. Roofs, obviously Class A asphalt roofs, metal roofs are even better. It takes a lot of heat for the asphalt, the composite roofs to ignite, but I think we've all have seen the one house that has, where two eaves meet and it's just probably a foot thick of pine needles. That'll probably generate enough heat to actually start crawling up underneath the shingles themselves. So just making sure we clean off our roofs and clean out our gutters. Again, traditionally the fire season starts in the Northwest, mid to late July, 1st of August. So if you can get it done before July 1st, it'll carry you through fire season. And let's be honest, who wants to clean roofs and gutters after July 4th anyways? There's lakes, rivers, a lot of other great things to be doing than home maintenance, right? Vents, be aware of your vents, your soffit vents, your eave vents. Um, every house has them. The best thing you can do is get screen mesh to put behind them, 1/8 inch, 1/16 inch mesh back behind it. That'll help break the embers up as they come through. They'll break them up small enough that it will help not to ignite the house. That's a weak point, but by putting that mesh, that can help safeguard that. Porches and patios, is, do you have screening underneath? This porch on the left is probably not the best because it's actually like 12 feet high off the ground. But the point to really think about there, and if it might be kind of hard to see, but the joists are mounted to wood directly to the house. That is what we'd call a wick. As this porch burns, coming towards the house, there's nothing stopping it to the house. Now, if you can put a sheet of metal or some type of join it by metal, the porch can burn. It hits the metal, it stops it. We cover fences here shortly, but it's the same thing as you have a fence that comes around your yard. Is that a wood post that's directly adjacent to your house? If so, maybe swap that out for a metal post. Again, it's going to break that wick from coming to your house. The patio on the right, beautiful, beautiful patio, composite decking. Um, as you can see, minimal landscaping around his crushed rock. They've got the ornamental plants spread out, did a really great job. The weak part of this actually is the lattice work is really pretty, but embers and leaves and pine needles can still get in. Thankfully, when he built it, he put that trap door in there that you can see, so you can actually still get in and clean it out. But when I talked to him, he laughed and he said, "Thankfully, my son still lives at home because I make him do that." So I talked to him, and he ended up purchasing 1/8. I think he got 1/8 inch mesh. He might have gone to 1/16, but I'm pretty sure he did 1/8. And he's put that 1/8 metal mesh all the way around that now to help prevent it. I haven't talked to him yet. I'm hoping to run into him soon to see if his son's had to crawl underneath that patio yet or not. But um, otherwise, it was a great job. Uh, composite decks, again, they can warp and buckle with a lot of heat. Um, that's one of those, low cost type stuff, changing out your mulch, doing the screen mesh, cleaning out your roofs and gutters. That's low cost things. High cost things, replacing a whole porch and patio. You know, I wouldn't just, I'm not going to tell someone to go, hey, you need to replace your wooden patio and put composite. That'd be something if, let's say, you get storm damage on it, it's time to replace it, it's falling apart. Maybe then consider it. It's kind of how you want to do it, but those are just some other, that's a more expensive type of idea, but it's things you can do. This slide, we kind of ignore some of this stuff. The point I want to show on this is that circle, these last two circles that pop up. So if you look, you have the siding of the house that actually sits probably about 2 feet above the ground. So you have the exposed foundation on the middle circle. That's great. And, obviously there was mulch on the ground that it burned through the mulch, but as it burned through the mulch, flames cannot get up underneath your siding. But what to be cognizant of is, as you can tell, house was built on a hillside, because as that slope of the ground comes up, it's going to meet the bottom of that siding. So again, zero escaping that, because where your siding, that overlap of your siding is a weak point that flames can get in. It's again why we recommend not having plants directly up against your house. You want that separation, minimize that. One thing I will point is you got the bush on the bottom, that's still alive. It's a high fuel moisture type little bush. It takes a lot more heat to ignite it. It only singed it. The other thing, think about your your propane tanks and your propane lines, I would recommend if you have propane tanks like this, maybe if you have mulch, maybe create like a, what would you call it, half circle, an ellipse or whatever around, so that way your tanks are actually sitting in rock or slate or on concrete, and then have the mulch up to it just to help minimize that exposure to those tanks and that heat source. It's not going to generate enough heat like this to cause damage. It could maybe to the fuel lines. Just be something to be thinking about through there. So could this ember start the house? You know, this is dead, dry grass. It's very minimal. It's very sparse. Uh, just kind of how one of the pieces of siding are kind of buckled out. I don't see this happening. Now, let's say you had a lot of dead grass, you had a lot of pine needles and leaves gathered up, your chances start to increase. I'm going to show a quick video talking about structure ignition coming from the outside.
So from start to finish, we're going to start with our ember generators, which we use to recreate a realistic ember exposure. Embers are those small burning and smoldering particles that may travel ahead of the fire front. And what we do with our generators is we create the realistic exposure, and in our wind tunnel, we're able to throw them at a building. And then we have a building that has two sides to it, a good side, which uses wildfire resistant construction, and what we're considering a typical building that we would see in a wildfire prone area. Expected that mulch on the ground there caught fire from the embers. The fire from the mulch burned up under this deck, and this whole deck was on fire. And so this fire on this deck caused flames right against the home. And then if we look there at the base of the door, there was actually the flames from this deck that burned through the bottom of the door. And on the inside of the house, we started to see smoke and flames. And so because this deck was a combustible material attached to the building, when the embers led to the ignition of this deck, we got flames inside of the building. Here we are on the wildfire resistant side of the house, where we had non-combustible siding, a 5-foot non-combustible zone and 6-inch gap. We had a metal gutter and multi-pane windows. And we see in comparison to the non-wildfire resistant side, the side had the same ember exposure. If you look here in the mulch, you can actually see some of the embers that had accumulated, but because they had no susceptible fuel to ignite, they just landed there and fizzled out. And here we have ornamental vegetation that again is susceptible to the embers, but because it's more than 5 feet away from the home, it didn't have enough energy to ignite, and it never led to a flame impact on the building. And it's two sides.
It won't let me do it. So what I was going to show is, again, that's, you know, that separation of with the ground and your siding and the fuels. If you, I was hoping I could pause it right on the point where it was doing it, but as that mulch was burning, and they backed out right before I hit pause, they back out and you can actually see the fire starting to burn the siding, and it's coming up underneath the actual siding. You can see fire starting to poke its way out, you know, 6 inches a foot above the next layer. So as it creeps up, it's burning back behind the siding, coming into the house and working its way back out. Again, like he talked, the patio, the front porch, it burned up underneath, started to catch that wood on fire, and then worked its way to the house and then into the house. I don't know much about the tape that they talk about in there. I recently heard it brought back up in a conversation I was having with somebody else. But it is some type of foil taping that you can use. So in this case, between the patio or the porch and the actual house itself, you can put it there as a barrier to help break that, again, the wick of the fire coming from the patio into the house.
So from start to finish,
Okay, let's not do that again. Okay. All right, now it's gonna be difficult.
Our wind tunnel to it, a good side, which uses
Okay,
wildfire resistant.
let's go to the next slide. Here we go. So, those are some of the things, again, low cost mulch to rock. Look at your plants, do you have juniper species, cedar species, arborvitaes? Switching that out to greener, more lush type plants, adding that separation between the plants. Look at the spacing, from the ground to where your siding starts. Is it 6? There's actually code for it. I want to say it's 6 or 9 inches. It has to be anyways, but is it more or less? Do you plants butt against your structures? Making sure your roofs are clean of needles and leaves, your gutters are clean, your porches, your patios, what's on your porch and patio. Those are all simple, very inexpensive things you can do. And honestly, most of it's just average spring, fall, winter maintenance going on around your house. Even cutting your grass, and we can even have comment debates on how much cutting the grass can make a difference or not. So next we're going to jump into the 5 to 30 feet zone, zone 2. Real quick, Mindy, we're still okay.
You're good.
So we'll get through this. So going to zone 2, that you're 5 to 30 feet, that's where your yard is. Lean, clean, and green. Mowing the grass, making sure it's watered, mowing it at least once or twice. I'll throw that out there in case anyone's trying to get out of mowing the grass. At least once or twice. Again, this is where we can really start working with people. Again, it's back to those the goals of your property. Do you want property that brings bees in and pollinators in? Do you want a property that supports wildlife? We can work with all this. Do you want a parking lot so then you just don't have to deal with it? That works too. I can help find a asphalt guy if you'd like. These are all things you can look at. Personally, I would love this patio. I would kill for this thing. But once you're in here, you can start bringing moderate to high biomass plants back in. Still, again, that patchy planting is still more encouraged, and we'll get a picture in here where it's more continuous, but there's ways to break it up. Fire resistance is best. If you bring trees, you can. Deciduous is obviously the better route to go. Your maples, your oaks. Sorry again, an East Coast guy. So those types of trees. Um, Evergreens, not that great. Still kind of want to stay away from the pines and conifers if you can. But again, it's if you want those trees, you can work around that and still make it work. Hardscaping is still always the best. Mulch, you can bring it back in. Shredded's never ideal, but you can still bring mulch back in if you'd like. I could drink a great cold beverage on that patio right there all summer long if I could. This is a really great example of, you know, we're creating patchiness, but still some type of continuous planning. The wall right there that they have built acts as a natural barrier to fire, if, whether it's coming from left to right in the picture. That's going to slow that progress up. There's pathways that weave all the way through. It's very finely crushed gravel through most of it. Again, creating a barrier, and essentially you are creating islands of plantings that are separated by pathways and rock walls. Again, highly green, highly lush plantings. The only thing to be cognizant of, again, is making sure you're pulling that dead material out while you're doing your maintenance and your weeding while you're tending to them. Recently talked to a gentleman down outside of Cheney. I wouldn't say right outside. He was actually really far away. He was actually closer to you guys. Um, his yard was great all the way around the house for 30 feet. It's green grass, whatever. But once you got past the 30 feet, he actually had these 10 by 15 odd shaped islands all throughout his yard. And in that, they were left natural. He lets the brush come in. He tends to them, so it's not continuous, but there's pine needles in it, there's brush, there's a couple ponderosas in it. But in between all of these islands, he mows the grass through it. And his concern was, well, what if fire gets into one of these? That's fine. You can let that one island burn. It cannot spread to the next. And the way he had pruned the trees and kept the brush, it will stay confined within that island. Between the island being raised slightly, it has a rock wall, and like I said, he mows the grass all the way around these islands. It's self-contained, so it still has that natural look to it, with little pathways and walkways through it, with just grass. So when we're talking trees, right plant, right place, the right condition. Um, I really need to show this picture to my father. He worked for the power company for 40 years. I've seen them do some very entertaining things with trees on power lines. It's pretty epic. Is it the right plant in the right place? Probably not. Again, right plant, right place. It was the right plant at the right place at one time. But now it's dead. Let's maybe move that out. Right plant, right place. A beautiful, beautiful little garden they have here. They have green plants. They're broken up a little bit. Um, they actually do have a soaker system in there, but they also have a sprinkler system. While I'm on sprinkler systems, I will say do not necessarily rely on them within a fire environment. Um, my buddy saw it in Colorado in 2012. Um, I saw it again in Colorado in 2020. And they just saw it up here in Medical Lake. As far as moving through, now if your own house is on a well, that's a different story. You have your own water source, as long as you can maintain power to the pumps. But in town, great example, Colorado Springs in 2012 burned. Massive fire came in. By the time my buddy got there, hydrants were dry, pools were dry. There was nowhere to get water anymore, and it's because enough fire apparatuses and resources were pulling water that drained it. As some of the structures were burning down, water was coming out as the pipes were melting, things like that. If you're leaving your sprinklers on, again, it may dry the reservoir out. You might start seeing black water, things like that. It's something to be cognizant of. I was on the Oregon-California state line and ran into a landowner, and I asked him, he actually had his sprinklers going full time. And I was like, hey, your sprinklers are on, I hope. And he laughed and he goes, oh yeah, it's solar powered. I've got my own well. It's tied to the pond as the backup. Blah blah. I think he laughed and said he can run that for over a week straight continuously before he finally runs out of water. I was like, okay, you're good. Just want to make sure, bud. Um, so it's just something to be cognizant of. Anyways, back to the main point. When I first saw this picture, I never even thought about it. This is a great idea. Encompasses all wants, needs, desires. You have the rock directly up against the house, pushing all any kind of flammable vegetation away. They maintain their mulch because, again, it's 2 to 3 feet away from the structure. They have the plants that they like, the hosta and the box plants. They're separated, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's all isolated and just broken apart. Beautiful. It's a great idea. I don't know why I hadn't thought about it first. No, I just got to pitch it to the old boss lady. Here's another example. This is a different house than what I was talking about earlier. But this is all crushed rock all the way around, with their yard in between, and then the plantings, and it's all broken up. Really pretty. I'd hate to know how much that costs, but it's a great way to do it. Um, Again, we were talking about the wicks. I used the fence earlier in regards to talking to the patios. Same concept with fences, same concepts with patios. You have a wood fence. As fire kind of works its way up through this fence and comes into the house, that wood post, the gate over there and the post, that's how it can enter into the structure itself by simply either replacing the gate with a metal gate or simply replacing the last post directly to the house. You know, that is breaking that wick. Interesting story, Austin, Texas. They had a fire down there and they could not figure out how they were getting structure ignition. Um, and they weren't even finding embers there. What happened is one structure burned down and then it started working its way through the fences. And that's how it was going structure to structure. It hit the structure, worked its way through the next fence, hit the structure. And actually in the drone footage, you can watch firefighters literally kicking fences down to break that wick. So something just to be cognizant of. Cut or leave. We'll kind of go through this guy real quick. You know, do you cut the tree? Do you tell the landowner to cut the tree or to leave the tree? I can pretty much tell you if you tell the landowner to cut the tree down, he's probably going to kick you off the property. They built the deck around the tree, so let's leave the tree, right? No, the trees, it's not a, they even built the roof around it. I just realized that. If you look really carefully, the roof is actually, anyways, the tree's fine. It's what you do around the tree. If you want to keep the tree is fine. It's what you do outside of the tree. You know, what is the deck made of? Is it wood? Is it composite? Even if it's wood, that's still fine. Personally, the threat is going to come what's underneath the porch and the patio. You know, how is the patio connected to the ground? I can see some posts are concrete, some are wood. Is it wood straight to the ground, or is there concrete there? You can't see it. Don't have enough picture to tell that story. What I'd really like to know again is what is underneath that patio. I can see at least a table. There's something else that looks kind of like wood. There's a lot of dead grass. This is obviously probably late July. The grass is turning purple, maybe mid-July, and it's taller. So is it a continuous fuel bed coming up under the house? To me, the tree's fine. Leave the tree. Let's focus on everything else. Um, you know, cut or leave. Again, here's your cedar species right directly against the house. It's going to burn hot. It's going to burn fast. And then underneath the trees, there's a lot of fuel down there between the mulch and all the pine needles. There's probably some leaves in there. Again, receptive fuel bed. It just takes the one ember to land somewhere into right in the center of that thing. The whole rest of the yard could be perfectly fine, but that one ember that lands right there, that's what's gonna cause the problems. Cut or leave the tree. Honestly, it's too close to the house. Cut the tree. I wouldn't even worry about the fire. Um, I'm worried about the foundation at this point, but you're talking brick siding, concrete around it. Um, I'd and green grass all the way around. I'd ride a fire out in that thing. But I'm worried about my foundation for sure. Um, go through that. So again, you know, just come up with a plan. Um, you know, how do you want to landscape it? What are your goals? Try to spread it out. You know, spread that continuity out, or break that continuity up. Use more green, um, more fire resistant plants. Being ember aware directly around the house. One example I'll tell people is, so here at my house every summer southwest winds 2 o'clock, like I said. And on an average day on where I live, you know, if we have pine needles starting to gather, let me back up. If you have a day, 2 days, 3 days of 10-mile-an-hour winds, 3-mile-an-hour winds, 10-mile-an-hour winds, 15-mile-an-hour winds, look at your yard. Where are the pine needles gathering? Right? So again, summertime southwest winds around my house. If you look around my house, they gather in certain areas on the southwest side of my house, or the southwest facing side of my house. How do they gather up? That is an indicator where those pine needles are gathering. That is where an indicator of embers will gather. Now flip to winter time. Why winter? Because the winds shift more northerly. And now look at your snow. Where's your snow drifts? Where is that happening? Again, snow drifts equate to where embers will gather. And the reason I talk about north winds during the winter is because Whitman County, all the way up through Ponderay County to the Canadian border, if we have north winds, our trees, our timber, our fuels are not used to north winds. And I know Whitman County knows about north wind events from 2020 very well, sadly, because I was just a couple miles north on the Whitney fire in Lincoln County. North winds are a very bad day. High elevated winds are always a bad day, but north winds are an extremely bad day. That's where a lot of trees come down. They're just not used to that, and so they're weak with the rooting systems. So look at where your snowdrifts are. Where do your pine needles gather up, and there'll be little clumps because of the eddying effect of the winds coming through. That's the weakest point. That's where embers like to gather during those wind events. Just a little indicator of something to look for. Again, zone 3, we're not going to go into it, but just a little funny, little funny cartoon that I got from Guy. You know, it's all about the reduction of energy from 30 feet or more. It's spacing the trees out. It's breaking that continuity up, reducing that energy of the fire, getting fired from the trees to the ground. That's how we work through that. And if you can't read it, so not only is it defensible space from wildfires, it also keeps the bears out of a garbage can. So I think it's a win-win for everybody involved in that one. But basically taking fire from there to there. So that is what I have for that. Close that down. Stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. We really appreciate the information and expertise.